Some men come to a place like that to feel small in a good way, and some come to make themselves feel large by shrinking everyone around them. I had been standing at the railings for maybe 20 minutes when the second kind arrived, and I want to tell you about him because I filmed the whole thing, and because what the camera caught was not the half of it. I am not a brave man. I sell flooring for a living, and the most dangerous thing I do most weeks is climb a customer's loft ladder. I had a free afternoon, a fold of sunlight on the cobbles, and a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, and I had come to watch the guard. That is what you do there. You stand at the black and gold railings of the Varan Palace forecourt, and you look at a man in a tall bearskin and a red wool tunic who does not look at you, and somewhere in the not being looked at you find a strange kind of peace. He stood inside his sentry box of stone and shadow, rifle grounded, white gloves still, chin strap a hard line across a jaw that did not move. The brass on his tunic threw little coins of light when the sun shifted. He was, in the most complete sense of the word, still. And then the noise came up the cobbles behind me, and the stillness had something to push against. You heard him before you saw him. A laugh that was built to be heard from 40 feet, a clap of 2 big hands, a voice doing that thing where every sentence is also an announcement. Here he is, lads, the legend. A ring camera on a little gimbal, a selfie stick held out like a lance, and behind it a man so wide across the shoulders that the crowd parted for him the way water parts for a barge. Tank top in June, arms shining with whatever men like that put on their arms, a phone strapped to the end of the pole and pointed at his own grinning face. I knew the type before I knew the man. I did not know yet that 500,000 people followed the grinning face, and that the grinning face had come here, specifically, to do something to the man who would not move. We're live, he told the pole, and today we are going to do the impossible. Today, my friends, I am going to make the KingsGuard blink first. A few people laughed, the nervous laugh you give a big dog you are not sure about. I did not laugh. I had a bad feeling already, the kind you cannot name, the kind that makes you check where the exits are without deciding to. He planted himself at the railings, closer than the little signs asked, and he turned the pole so the lens took in both their faces, his own, broad and burnished and delighted with itself, and the guards, half in the shadow of the bearskin, eyes set on a point in the middle distance that had nothing to do with any of us. Staring contest, the big man said. Me and him, no blinking. Loser buys the gym a round of protein shakes. He winked at the lens. He doesn't know it yet, but he already lost. He could not have known how right and how wrong that one sentence was. The guard did not look at him. That is the thing people who have never stood at those railings do not understand. The guard was not refusing the contest. The contest did not exist for him. His eyes were not locked on the big man's eyes in some silent duel. They were simply forward, on the line they were trained to hold, on the empty middle air where a soldier's attention lives when he is on duty, and the whole world is trying to climb into his lap. The big man thought he was an opponent. He was a piece of weather. The guard had stood through worse weather than him and would stand through worse again. But the camera does not film that. The camera films a huge man leaning in and a still man not reacting, and to a phone screen, those two things look like a fight. So the big man leaned in further, and the crowd thickened, and the coffee went fully cold in my hand, and I lifted my own phone, because some instinct older than flooring told me this was going to matter. Look at the focus, the big man crowed, an inch off the rail now, his face so near the guards that I could see the guards' lashes against the shadow. Look at that discipline. You know what that is. That's what I teach. That's mindset. This man and I, we are the same, we just wear different uniforms. He grinned at his own joke. Difference is, I'd never let some little kid stare me down and win. Nobody had said anything about a child. He just liked the word kid in that sentence, the way it made the still man smaller. I felt the crowd's mood tip a half degree, that quiet shift when amusement starts to curdle into something that is watching for a thing to go wrong. Come on, he said, and his voice dropped the performance and found a harder floor under it. Come on, blink, react, do something. He waved his free hand in front of the guard's eyes fast, a magician's flourish. The guard did not blink. He clapped his hands once hard, a foot from the guard's face, the sound of it cracking off the palace stone. The guard did not blink. And I watched the big man's grin do a small, ugly thing. The thing a grin does when it stops being fun and starts being a problem the owner needs to solve. He had come to win a staring contest against a man who was not in one. He had built a whole afternoon, a whole live audience, on beating someone who had already, quietly, by simply doing his duty, refused to play. And a man like that cannot lose to nothing. He needs an opponent or he needs a victim, and the guard had declined to be the first. "You think you're better than me," the big man said, low, almost to himself, and that was the moment I stopped feeling sorry for the joke and started feeling afraid of the man. He turned the pole. The phone on the end of it, that little flat rectangle of metal and glass with the world watching through it, came around in his fist, not pointed at his own face anymore, pointed forward, held like a thing you poke with. "React," he said. "React or I'll make you." I heard myself say, quietly, "Mate, don't." I do not think he heard me. I do not think he heard anyone but the 500,000 in his ear and the one man in front of him who would not give him what he came for. The guard's eyes stayed forward. The brass caught the sun. Somewhere behind me, a woman pulled her boy back by the collar without knowing why. And the big man drew the selfie stick back a few inches, the metal end of it level with the still man's cheekbone, and every part of the afternoon that had been a joke a minute ago went very, very quiet. I kept filming. God help me, I kept filming because I did not know what else a man like me could do. And I will tell you exactly what happened next, because I was close enough to see all of it, and because the version that went around the world later got almost everything right except the one thing that mattered most. He jabbed the pole at the guard's face. It was a quick thing, a flick of the wrist, and the camera at the end of it caught the guard's cheek, a glancing tap, hard enough to knock the chinstrap a hair off, true, hard enough that I heard the small, dull knock of metal on bone. A gasp went through the crowd, the whole front rank of us, one breath sucked in together. The big man laughed, delighted, because he had finally gotten a thing to happen. He felt that. He felt that, lads, did you see? He did not finish, because the guard had not flinched, and the not flinching was somehow worse for the man than any flinch would have been. Let me be precise about this, because the precision is the whole point. A flooring salesman's eyes are not trained for much, but I was 4 feet away and I have replayed it 1,000 times. The metal struck the guard's face and the guard did not move. Not his eyes, not his jaw, not the hand on the rifle. The bearskin did not so much as quiver. A red line came up on his cheekbone, where the edge of the phone had caught the skin. A thin, bright mark in the cold daylight. And that line was the only proof on his whole body that anything had touched him at all. He bled a little, the smallest amount, the way you bleed from a shaving nick, and he stood there bleeding and looking at the middle air as if the man in front of him were a pigeon that had landed on the railing. I have thought a great deal since about what that cost him. People watch the clip and they see a man who did nothing, and they call it discipline as though discipline were an absence, a not doing, an easy stillness. It is not. I have carried a heavy thing up a staircase and felt my arms shake with the strain of holding it level, and that man's whole life in that second was the holding of a far heavier thing perfectly level while it bit into him. Every nerve he had must have been screaming the oldest message a body knows. He hit you, hit him back, defend yourself, that is what hands are for. And he answered every one of those screams with the same flat, total no. He did not defend himself. He defended the post. There is a difference, and the difference is everything, and the big man with the 500,000 followers did not know there was a difference in the world. "Whoa," the big man said, and for just a flicker something honest crossed his face, surprise maybe, the first true thing he had felt all afternoon. He had expected a shove, a shout, a swat at the pole, the spluttering reaction of an ordinary man who had been touched without permission. He had a whole video planned around that reaction, and there was no reaction. There was a thin red line and a pair of forward-set eyes and a stillness that did not even have contempt in it, because contempt would have been a response too, and the guard would not give him that either. So he did the thing that men like that always do when the world refuses to play their game. He raised the stakes. "All right," he said, and his voice climbed back up into performance, but there was a crack down the middle of the performance now, a thinness, a man talking faster because the floor under him had moved. "All right, tough guy, you want to play statue, we play statue." He drew the pole back again. "Let's see how long the statue lasts. I want to stop here and tell you about the crowd, because the crowd is the part the clip never showed, and the crowd is why what happened happened. We were maybe 60 people along that stretch of railing, and a minute before we had been a loose, happy, half-watching crowd, the kind of crowd that takes a photo and moves on. The first jab changed us. You could feel it change. The laughter was gone. A man near me, older in a flat cap, had stepped half forward with his fists half closing, and his wife had a hand flat on his chest. 2 young women had stopped filming themselves and turned their phones on the big man. A boy of about 10 had gone quiet and pale at the rail, and his mother had drawn him back and back until he was behind her hip, and she was watching the big man with the particular still fury of a parent who has decided, somewhere below thinking, that she will put her own body between this and her child if she has to. 60 strangers, and in the space of one cheap flick of a wrist we had all become the same thing. We had become witnesses. That word matters. I keep coming back to it. We were not a mob, nobody rushed him, nobody touched him. The older man's wife kept her hand on his chest and he let her. But 60 phones came up and 60 pairs of eyes fixed on the big man, and I think on some animal level he felt the temperature drop, because he glanced sideways just once, and the grin he found for us was a different grin than the one he had walked up with. It was asking us to be on his side, and we were not on his side. We had picked the still man. We had picked him the instant the metal touched his face, and the big man could feel that he had, somewhere in the afternoon, become the thing everyone was filming for the wrong reason. It should have stopped there. If he had been a slightly better man, or a slightly smarter one, he would have laughed it off, made some joke about the legend being too hardcore even for him, and walked away with a video that would have done fine. The guard had given him every off-ramp a man could be given. He had given him nothing to fight, no insult to point at, no shove to act outraged about. He had handed him, free of charge, the dignity of an exit. The big man did not take it. That is the tragedy of the whole thing, if a thing this small can have a tragedy. He had a wall in front of him that would not move and a crowd around him that had turned, and instead of reading either of those things correctly, he read them as a challenge to his brand. He squared his shoulders. He set his feet. And he lifted the selfie stick a third time higher now, the metal end of it coming up toward the guard's face with real force behind it, a swing and not a flick. And I heard the older man in the flat cap say, low and clear, "He's going to do it again." And I heard the mother behind me say one word to her boy, "Don't look." And I heard my own breath go out of me, and I did the only useful thing a flooring salesman has ever done in his life. I kept the camera steady, and I got all of it. The second blow never landed. Here is where the world's version and mine begin to part. The clip that went around, the one that played on screens in every country with a screen, starts a half-second after this, and so it misses the move entirely, and people argued for weeks about how the guard had done nothing, and yet ended the man. He did not do nothing. He did one thing, and he did it so fast and so cleanly that a phone held in a shaking hand could not catch it, and I am one of the very few who saw it with the naked eye. As the pole came up, the guard moved. Not a brawl, not a swing, not the wild flailing of an angry man. One movement, economical as a closing door. His left hand came off the rifle and his forearm came up in a cross, the white glove turning, and it met the descending pole at the wrist of the swing and stopped it dead. Not knocked it away. Stopped it. There was a flat, hard sound, glove and bone against aluminum, and the selfie stick simply ceased to travel, as if it had run into the corner of the building. The big man's whole arm jolted with the shock of being stopped, his shoulder rocking, his feet shuffling to keep his balance, and for the first time all afternoon the surprise on his face was complete and unguarded. He had swung at a statue, and the statue had caught his arm in the air and held it there, and the holding was effortless, and the effortlessness was the most frightening thing I have ever seen a man do with his body. And then this is the part: the guard let go. He did not throw the man. He did not strike him. He did not even hold him for the satisfaction of holding him. The instant the pole had stopped, the guard's hand returned to the rifle, his arm came back to his side, his eyes returned to the middle air, and he was a statue again, as if the whole motion had been a single tick of a clock and the clock had simply gone on. He had used exactly the amount of force the moment required and not 1 ounce more. He had defended the post and the post only. A man had swung a weapon at his face and the guard had stopped the weapon and then, deliberately, chosen not to do any of the dozen further things he plainly could have done. I did not have the words for it then. I have them now. It was the most disciplined act of restraint I will ever witness, and it took place in under a second, and the man it was performed upon was too busy being humiliated to understand that he had just been spared. Because that is what the crowd understood all at once in the same breath. The big man had not been beaten. He had been refused. 3 times now the guard had refused him, refused to play, refused to flinch, refused to fight, and the third refusal was the one that broke something. The big man stumbled back a step, clutching the pole, and he looked at his own arm as if it belonged to someone else, and then he looked at us, 60 strangers with 60 raised phones, and he saw exactly what we had become. Not an audience, a record. "He hit me," the big man said. Nobody answered. The flat-cap man laughed once, short and hard, a laugh with no kindness in it. The 2 young women had their phones up and steady. Somewhere a child asked a question and was hushed. "You all saw it," the big man said, louder, turning, the gimbal swinging wild now, his own live feed catching jerks of sky and stone and faces. "He assaulted me. On camera. That's assault, that's you're all witnesses, you saw him." "We saw you," said the mother behind me. She was not loud. She did not need to be. She said it the way you state a fact about the weather, and it carried down the whole rail, and I watched it land on the big man like a stone in still water, the rings of it spreading out across 60 faces that did not blink any more than the guard had. That was the moment the day turned, and it turned without a single one of us laying a hand on him. The guard had not turned it. The guard was already back inside his stillness, the thin red line drying on his cheek, the rifle grounded, the eyes forward. He had simply held his post and let the man's own choices arrive at their own destination. The crowd had turned it, 60 quiet people who had decided which of these 2 men they believed. And the cameras had turned it, his own most of all, that little glass eye on the end of the pole that he had brought to make himself a legend, and that had instead filmed every second of him swinging metal at a man's face. I heard the boots before I saw them. That particular sound, fast, even, certain, coming up the cobbles from the direction of the gatehouse. And the crowd to my left began to part, and 2 officers in dark uniforms came through the gap at a pace that was not quite a run, but was not the stroll of men who think they have time. Behind them, at the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of another figure in a tunic like the sentries, an older man with more on his sleeve and a face like a closed gate, coming out from the gatehouse with the bearing of someone who has been watching a screen and has seen enough. The big man saw the officers and made the worst decision of a day already crowded with bad ones. He turned the pole on them. "Officers, officers, good, you saw it. This man assaulted me, I want him." "Sir," said the nearer officer, "lower the stick." "I want him arrested. I'm pressing charges. Do you know how many people are watching this right now?" "Sir," the officer's voice did not rise. It did the thing the guard's whole body had been doing for 10 minutes. It simply refused to enter the man's game. "Lower the stick, now." And the big man, who had spent an entire afternoon learning nothing, lifted the stick instead, to gesture, I think, only to gesture, to point at the guard, to make his case to the lens. But you do not lift a metal pole toward a police officer who has twice told you to lower it. And the rest happened with the brisk, unbeautiful efficiency of men who do this for a living. The pole came down. A hand closed on the big man's wrist. He started to pull away. That was the assault on a constable, right there, that pull, though he would never understand it as one. And then there were two of them on him, and the gimbal clattered to the cobbles, still filming, lens up, and it caught the whole gray sky and the underside of the bearskin, and the precise moment the big man went from being the star of his own broadcast to being the subject of someone else's report. Through all of it, the guard did not look down, not at the man being cuffed 3 feet from his boots, not at the pole on the stones, not at the 500,000 invisible eyes. He looked forward at the middle air, at the line he was trained to hold, and the brass on his tunic caught the sun and threw its little coins of light, and the thin red mark on his cheek was already going from red to brown. I lowered my phone for the first time in 10 minutes and found that my hand was shaking, not the guard's, mine. They walked him away along the rail, one officer at each shoulder, and the strangest thing about it was the quiet. There was no cheer. I had half expected a cheer, the way crowds do, but nobody clapped and nobody jeered. We just watched him go, 60 of us, and the watching was its own verdict. He had wanted more than anything to be looked at. We looked at him all the way to the gatehouse, and not one of us looked at him the way he had come hoping to be looked at. And I think if he had any sense left under the noise, he would have understood that this was the real punishment, and that everything that came after was only the paperwork of it. The older man in the tunic, the color sergeant, I learned later, though to me at the time he was just authority made flesh, went to the sentry first before anything else. That told me something about the place. Not to the crowd, not to the cameras, not to chase the man being marched off. To the sentry. He stepped close and said something low that I could not hear, and the young guard's eyes flicked to him for less than a heartbeat. The first time those eyes had moved toward a human face in the whole long ordeal, and then went forward again, and the sergeant gave the smallest nod a man can give and stepped back, and that was it. Whatever passed between them was 4 words at most, but I understood it. The sergeant had asked in soldier's shorthand, "Are you fit to stand?" And the young man had answered in the same shorthand, "I am," and the matter was closed and the post was kept. They did not relieve him. He had earned the right to finish his own watch, and they let him have it. A constable came down the line then, a calm woman with a notebook, asking who had seen it and who had filmed it. I gave my name, I gave my number. I held up my phone and she looked at the 10 minutes of footage on it, and something in her face settled, the look of someone whose job just got easier. "You'll want to keep that safe," she said, "and you may be asked to send it across. Don't trim it, send the whole thing." I told her I would not have dreamt of trimming it. She almost smiled. "No," she said, looking back up the rail toward the gatehouse. "I don't suppose the gentleman trimmed his either." She was right, and that was the heart of the whole business, and it is worth saying plainly. The man had been broadcasting live. Everything, the announcement that he would make the guard blink, the wave of the hand, the clap an inch from the man's face, the first jab, the line about the statue, the swing, all of it had gone out in real time to 500,000 people, and had been saved, copied, clipped, and downloaded by thousands of them before the officer's boots ever reached the cobbles. He had built his whole afternoon as evidence against the guard. He had built it instead as evidence against himself, and there was no taking it back, because it had never been his to take back. It had belonged to the crowd the moment it left his pole. I went home and could not eat. I sat with the phone on the table and watched my own footage a dozen times, and somewhere around midnight I did what the constable had said and sent it across to the number she had given me, the whole 10 minutes, untrimmed. Then I made the only decision in this entire story that was mine to make, and I have never been sorry for it. I did not post it. Half the rail had already posted theirs. The clip did not need me. What it needed, I thought, was for at least one of the 60 to keep the long version honest, the version with the catch in it, the version that showed the guard let go. So I kept mine, and I sent it where it would do some good, and I went to bed, and I did not sleep much. By morning, the short version was everywhere. You will have seen it, even if you do not think you have. A huge man at a palace railing, a still guard, a flick, a swing, a blur, and then officers in cuffs, and a metal pole rolling on cobbles with the gray sky in the lens. It went out under 100 different captions, and they were all some version of the same thing the crowd had decided in real time at the rail. He picked the wrong man. By the time I had my second coffee, it had been watched more times than there are people in this country. The grinning face from the gym was suddenly the most recognized face in the kingdom, and not one person who recognized it was on his side. His own channel was the first thing to go. He had built it on a particular kind of swagger, the man who fears nothing, who breaks all the rules, who tells you the world is soft and he is hard. And the clip cut that story off at the root, because the whole world had just watched the hardest man in the gym swing a stick at someone who would not even look at him, and lose, without his target raising more than one hand. You cannot sell fearlessness after the entire kingdom has watched you flinch at the consequences of your own swing. The comments turned first, then the numbers, then the sponsors. By the second day, the energy drink logo had vanished from his page. By the third, the supplement brand that had paid him to flex in their tank tops put out a careful little notice about not condoning violence and quietly unpinned every photo of him from their wall. The gym he was always tagging, the one whose name he wore across his chest in that very clip, posted a single line saying the individual in the video had never been an instructor there and was not welcome on the premises. Whether that was true or a swift rewriting of history, I never learned. It did not matter. The machine he had built to make himself large had reversed its engines and was now making him small at exactly the speed it had once made him big, and there is a justice in that which no court could improve upon. But the court came too. I want to be careful here because the law is not a punchline and I will not make it one. He was charged common assault on the guard for the jab and the swing, a separate matter for the pull against the constable. The footage did the work. 60 angles of it, my untrimmed 10 minutes among them, all telling one story with no contradiction in it anywhere, because there had been nothing staged and nothing edited. There had only been a man who did a thing in front of everyone and a crowd that happened to be holding the right tools to remember it exactly. His lawyer, I heard, was good. There was not much for a good lawyer to work with. You cannot argue self-defense when you are the one who walked 40 feet across a forecourt to put your weapon in another man's face. And you cannot argue accident when the same hand swings the same pole 3 times. And you certainly cannot argue any of it when you yourself were the cameraman. I was asked to give a statement, and I gave it plainly, the way I have told it to you. And the night before I went in to give it, I found myself thinking less about the big man and more about the 4 feet of cold air between his face and the guards, and the thin red line, and the white glove that had stopped the swing, and then, deliberately, let go. The hearing, when it came, was a small room and a large quiet. The big man arrived without the pole, without the tank top, in a suit that did not fit him the way the suit's owner had hoped, and he was a different size than he had been at the rail, not because he had shrunk, but because the room would not magnify him. There was no live feed. There was no crowd to play to, or rather the crowd was 3 rows of strangers who would not laugh at his jokes, and a man cannot perform fearlessness to people who are not afraid of him. He looked smaller because, for the first time in a long time, nobody was making him bigger. I almost felt sorry for him. Then they played the footage and I stopped. They played his own first. It is one thing to swing a metal pole at a man's face in the heat of a forecourt with 500,000 invisible people cheering you on. It is another to sit in a silent room and watch yourself do it on a screen 3 times in front of the people who will decide what becomes of you. I watched him watch himself, and I saw the exact moment the story he had been telling himself for years came apart in his hands. The jab, the clap, the line about the statue, the swing, and the still man who would not give him the fight he had crossed a forecourt to start. On the small screen, away from the noise, with no music and no caption, it was not a legend stunt. It was just a large man being cruel to a man who had taken an oath not to react, and discovering, far too late, that cruelty without a reaction is only a portrait of the cruel. The guard did not attend. He did not need to. He had given his statement in the only language he was ever going to use, the language of the white glove and the unmoved eyes, and the footage spoke it for him. I did learn his name, in the dry way you learn such things in a courtroom, and I will not repeat it here because the whole meaning of the man was that he was not a name that day. He was a post, and a post is bigger than a name. He was convicted on both counts. The sentence was not dramatic, a community order, a compensation sum, the loss of his right to come within sight of those railings again. The law is rarely as theatrical as the internet wants it to be. But the conviction was the smaller half of what happened to him, and everyone in that room knew it, and I suspect he knew it best of all. The larger half had already happened, out in the open, in front of everyone, the day the crowd turned and the cameras kept rolling and the wall would not move. The court only wrote it down. Outside afterward there were reporters, and one of them asked me the question they all wanted answered, the question the comments under every version of the clip had been arguing for weeks. Why didn't the guard do more? He had every right, they said. The man hit him, swung at him. He could have put him on the ground and no one would have blamed him. Why catch the swing and then let go? Why give the man even that? I have thought about how to answer that for a long time, and I think the answer is the whole reason I have told you any of this. He let go because the post was never about him. A lesser man, me, on a bad day, most of us would have wanted the satisfaction, would have wanted the throw, the takedown, the moment of getting his own back, the clip of the bully eating cobbles. And that clip would have done numbers too. The internet would have loved it. But it would have made the guard a fighter, and a fighter is a man defending himself, and the guard was not there to defend himself. He was there to hold a line, and the line was bigger than his pride, bigger than his stinging cheek, bigger than any urge his hands knew. The instant he had stopped the swing, the line was safe again, and the moment the line was safe, his job was done, and a man who does his job does not do 1 inch past it for the pleasure of it. That is the discipline, not the not flinching. The flinching he could not help. Any man's nerves scream when metal comes at his face. The discipline was the letting go. The discipline was choosing, with a man's arm caught helpless in his glove and every right in the world to make him pay for it, to want nothing for himself. That is what the big man could never have beaten, in a staring contest or any other. He came to win something off a man who wanted nothing, and you cannot take from a man who has set himself down to hold something larger than his own wanting. He was, as he said himself, always going to lose. He just had the loser and the winner turned around in his head, the way a man does when he has spent too long looking at his own face in a little glass screen. I went back to the railings a few weeks later. I am not sure why. To finish something, maybe. It was a gray, plain afternoon, the cobbles wet, the crowd thin. And there he was. I cannot tell you for certain it was the same man. The bearskin and the discipline make them brothers, but I let myself believe it was, inside his box of stone and shadow, rifle grounded, white gloves still, chin strap a hard line across a jaw that did not move. Eyes forward, on the middle air, on the line. There was no mark on his cheek now. There was no sign anywhere on him that anything had ever touched him at all, because nothing ever really had. The only thing that had been changed by that whole loud afternoon was the loud man, and a few 100,000 strangers, and one flooring salesman who would never look at stillness the same way again. A family stopped near me at the rail. The boy, 6 or 7, tugged his father's sleeve and asked the question children always ask there, The only honest question: why doesn't he move? I waited for the father's answer, the one we all give about rules and orders and not being allowed. But the father crouched down to his son's height and pointed gently at the unmoving man and said something I have kept ever since. "He moves," the father said. "He moves when it matters. The rest of the time he's strong enough to stand still." The boy looked at the guard for a long while, the way children look when something has gone in deep, and then he stood a little straighter himself, unconsciously, the way you do near a thing you admire, and the two of them moved on down the rail. I stayed a while longer. The brass caught what little sun there was and threw its small coins of light. A tour group came and went. Somewhere a phone was filming, because there is always a phone. And I thought about the man who had come to that exact spot to make a still man blink, and how he had failed, and how the failing had cost him everything he thought he was, and how none of it had cost the guard so much as a backward glance. The big man had wanted to be looked at by the world. He got his wish in the end. The world looked, and the world saw him plainly, and that was the whole of his punishment and the whole of his lesson, if he was ever capable of taking one. The guard had wanted nothing. He had stood his watch, kept his post, caught one swing and let it go. And of the two men at the railings that afternoon, only one of them is still standing exactly where he meant to be, unmoved, unbroken, eyes forward on the line he was trained to hold proof, in red wool and brass and a hard, quiet jaw, that the strongest thing a man can do is very often to do nothing at all, on purpose, for someone other than himself.